This video will show you some basics about formatting in APA style. Mastering APA style takes time and practice. To master APA, the APA manual should be your only resource for confirming format and style. Any other resource is probably wrong. As someone who has used APA style for the past 13 years and written countless documents in APA style, I always have my manual within reach and am constantly referring to it. My own professors were the same way, so don't feel like you need to magically memorize any of these rules. Just go to the manual. In APA style, manuscripts have 1-inch margins all around, are written in Times New Roman font size 12, and are double spaced evenly throughout the entire manuscript. It's best to manually change these settings yourself and avoid any so-called template that is probably wrong. Regarding margins, make sure that you go into your paragraph and pagination settings to ensure that orphan and widow control is not checked. Typesetters refer to the last line of a paragraph at the top of the page as a widow and the first line of the paragraph at the bottom of the page as an orphan. It is acceptable to have widows and orphans in APA style because they ensure that your margin stays at 1 inch all around. Another tip to ensure that your margins are 1 inch all around is to set the bottom margin at 0.7 inches and the other margins at 1 inch, especially if you are using Microsoft Word. Word puts air under the bottom line of text, therefore, changing the bottom margin will ensure that you have a true 1-inch bottom margin. Keep in mind that your professor will probably only notice if they use a ruler. Remember that simply changing your paragraph settings to double will not guarantee even double spacing. Make sure that you select Don't Add Space between paragraphs of the same style, or set the before and after spacing to 0 points. Centered on the title page is the title of the manuscript, the author's name, and the author's affiliation. APA is not particularly picky about the exact placement of the title info. Just make sure that it starts somewhere in the top third of the page and has a little bit of space before the top of the page. In double spacing, you can hit enter 5 times and it should be good. The paper title listed on the title page should have every major word capitalized. Since the section heading of the introduction is the paper title of the manuscript itself, copy and paste your paper title and put it on the first line of the next page. To make things easier for yourself, insert page breaks between pages as opposed to pressing return or enter a million times. Only the first page has the words running head : without all caps. Notice the R is capitalized, but the H is not. The running head is an abbreviated version of your title in all caps and should be no more than 50 characters long. The second page needs to include only the text after the colon in all caps. On the same line as the running head, tab over until your cursor is flush against the 1-inch margin. In the current position, enter a plain page number. You may need to adjust the alignment of your tab stop settings to ensure that numbers above 10 don't get pushed to the line below. Format the entire running head in the appropriate font and size. Use section headers in your document to help with the flow of the paper. Think of them like an outline whereby you have top-down progression of information. The first part of the manuscript is assumed to be the introduction and does not carry a heading that labels it as an introduction. Therefore, leave the paper title unbolded, centered on the first line of the page. All subsequent first levels of heading should be bolded, centered, and use title case capitalization. You will name the various levels of heading as appropriate to your manuscript. See section 3.03 of the APA manual to see formatting for all levels of heading. The reference page is technically not part of the body of the paper, which is why we do not bold the text references at the top of the page. Every citation that appears in your text should have a corresponding entry in your reference page. Each entry is alphabetized by author last name. Make sure that all entries are indented using a hanging indent. This makes it easier to read each entry. Notice that each section of the reference entry ends with a period. These quote-unquote reference sentences convey specific information about the type of source. For example, journal article, book, edited book chapter, as well as details of that source, such as year of publication, publisher, etc. Almost all reference entries list the author information first and then the year of publication second. Each entry should begin with the last name of the first author. Never type out the author's first names. Always use initials and space them out accordingly. Journal article titles and full book names use sentence capitalization, meaning the first letter of the first word, as well as any word followed by a punctuation, is uppercase and all subsequent words are lowercase. The journal title, however, should be in title case capitalization. In your reference section, make sure to italicize any book titles, journal titles, and journal volume numbers. If your source is digital, you may need to enter the digital object identifier or persistent URL. For all reference formatting guidelines, refer to the manual and follow their examples. Finally, you should understand how to credit your sources in text. Simply listing them in the reference section is not sufficient for crediting sources and is actually plagiarism. The APA manual has an excellent table, Table 6.1, on how to cite different types of sources in text. If you write a sentence using the author's name as part of the sentence, then you need to include the year immediately following the author or authors' names. Citations that use this narrative approach are preferred because they facilitate active writing. That is, authors are doing the action in the sentence. However, if you want to make a quick parenthetical reference, then you need to include the author name and year separated by a comma. Remember, the period goes outside the parentheses. If a work has 2 or more authors, you will list both authors every time you mention them. If you cite in parentheses, then you will use the and sign. If you cite them in a sentence, then you need to type out the word and. If a work has 3 to 5 authors, list all authors, the first mention, and then abbreviate all non-first author names using the phrase et al. Et al is an abbreviation for the Latin et alia, which means and others. Therefore, grammatically treat the citation Bradley et al. As if you wrote the word they, because you are referring to multiple people. Remember that there is no comma at all in the phrase Bradley et al. If you are citing Bradley et al. In parentheses, put a comma after the period and before the year, just as if you had a single or double author in text citation. What if you keep referencing the same source over and over again within the same paragraph? If the citation is part of the sentence, then you only need to include the year in parentheses after the first mention. If your citation is in parentheses, then you cite the author and year with each mention. If you mention the source in a subsequent citation in a sentence in a different paragraph, you need to include the year in parentheses again after the first mention. Finally, if you have any direct quotes, you'll need to include the page number in your in-text citation. Try to avoid direct quoting as much as possible. A hallmark of APA style is to summarize past research. By definition, quoting is not summarizing, therefore use direct quotes sparingly. So far, we've covered the basic format, title page, section, headings, references, and in-text citations. You should now be somewhat familiar with what an APA-style paper should look like. Remember to not be afraid to consult your APA manual first for double-checking form and style.